From meaningless errands to exploration to contract killing, they will do whatever you wish, so long as you pay them sufficiently. They work in the offices, syndicates, and the wings. Their tasks vary from the banal things to something truly sublime. This is the quote that you get when you first reach the White Dawn in Lobotomy Corporation, called a request, explaining what people, called fixers, do in their everyday lives. Fixers are an interesting topic to cover since their existence play a major role in the city. No matter where you look, there will always be mentions of fixers, especially if it's in regards to dealing with any sort of problem or threat. After all, they are the sort of people that you would look for if you want something to be dealt with, something to be fixed, you know? If you want someone to protect you, you got the Zwei. If you want to deal with someone but don't have the strength to fight back, you got the Sink. If you want to kill someone without anyone knowing, you got the She. And that's only mentioning the association fixers. Fixers that are part of one of 12 massive organizations that are built to do very specific things, whether it be assassinations, duels, protection, or whatever else the association has to offer. And outside of associations themselves, there are also some independent offices that have fixers that can also do your job, sometimes even better than association fixers, and are usually cheaper. The point is that as long as you have the capital to hire them, the fixers will do whatever. But there might be some things that are just too much for any old regular fixer office, or offices even, to handle, which usually comes in the form of any sort of powerful Star of the City threat. Well, in that case, you'll most likely have to wait for a different type of fixer to appear and deal with them. A very special kind of fixer. You see, the types of fixers that I'm talking about are fixers called the Colors, aka color fixers, as they are usually known. And as said before, they are a special type of fixer, unique amongst all fixers in the city as they are beyond the grading system, and are the ideal choice amongst many fixers of handling Star of the City threats, as they are usually strong enough to deal with them. Now, that's not to say that grades are the biggest measure of which character is stronger, god no, but grades do give a good idea of the type of strength certain fixers hold, and usually color fixers are stronger than grade 1 fixers, usually. But being a color fixer is not just having a special grade above grade 1, it's also considered to be a sort of privilege to have the title of a color in the first place. The moment you are given the title by the Hana Association, you are also given a sort of freedom, an absolute freedom to do whatever you wish and pick up whatever job you want as a fixer, while still being paid hella money. And these colors are looked up upon by other fixers as well, along with some fixer fanatics, shall we say, for whatever reason that may be, whether it's the freedom that comes with the title or the strength that they hold. Essentially, in the eyes of the common person, fixer, or whatever, color fixers are the idols of the fixer world, essentially. However, despite all that praise and strength, the title and job of a color fixer can be removed, just as easily as it was given to them by the Hana Association. After all, the truth of being a color fixer is that you are not really given anything, but are rather forced into it. To quote Leeway's page in Library of Runa, the title of a color is forcibly given to fixers who qualify, essentially. Can a fixer be truly happy with freedom that was forcefully handed to them? Well, the title and the freedom of a color fixer are forcefully given, but can also be forcefully taken back if needed, kind of like what happened to a certain someone that we'll get into in a bit. But overall, I find the concept of color fixers fascinating because their strength is not the only thing that makes them interesting, as they're all distinct in one way or another. There are a lot of differences to be found whenever you talk about them and compare them all together. But along with that, there's also the fact that despite being praised a bunch by certain people, they themselves aren't necessarily heroes, to say the least. They for sure can be considered to be a hero by some, but the moment you look into it, most, if not all of them, aren't the type of people to go out of their way to save someone. After all, they too are people. People shackled by the city and its rules. People that are paid a ton of money to fight certain threats. They are still workers, after all. Well, workers that are treated a lot more special than the rest of them for all the right reasons, but you get my point. Color fixers are very, very cool, and I believe now is a good time to talk about all of the color fixers that we know of, thanks to a certain ID that is coming out, and also a certain person that appears in Canto 9. With that said though, I should mention, if it wasn't obvious enough already, there will be spoilers for Canto 9 and practically everything surrounding the Project Moon universe, so yeah. With that being said, let's begin with our first color fixer on the list. Vespa Crabro, aka the Yellow Harpoon, is the latest edition of color fixers that we know of. First appearing in Canton 9 as a color, however, his first actual appearance as a character is in a novel called The Distortion Detective, where he interrogates and chases down Moses and Ezra as a grade 1 fixer and a taboo hunter of Encore for breaking the taboo of no recording in the wing, even though technically speaking, Uriah is the reason for his appearance, but whatever. Eventually, he gets expelled from Encore due to being sealed inside Uriah's ego for a very long time, before being released and comes to assist Moses on her adventures to Elcor after some convincing, since he has nowhere else to go because of the expulsion, and was promised to be reinstated back in Encore by Diaz. At some point in the future, after the novel, Moses and the group joins Limbus Company as the LCD, and Vespa gets promoted to the new yellow color by the Honda Association around the time of Canto 9, and you know the rest, I suppose. I know that I practically skimmed through a lot of things when it comes to his role in Distortion Detective, but to be honest, there really isn't much else to say about what we know about him currently, other than his troubled past with the Thumb, of course, where he was a potential survivor of one of the Thumb's purges. Still though, I do have to say, Vespa is a fucking badass, and you know it. Design-wise, I love the look. Compared to his old outfit when he was in Encore, this one is fucking lovely. I will love any character that uses their coats as capes. I don't fucking care what you have to say about that. It's sick. But along with this cool design, the biggest highlight of it all are his two weapons, his Huando and the signature harpoon that got him his title in the first place, Gunnir. Gunnir is described to be a precious relic of the highest rarity that was originally a spear tip that Vespa found when he was a blood-soaked young boy in the ruins, potentially after surviving the purge, by mere coincidence, as the player text likes to describe when talking about Gunnir. And it was also by some coincidence that he also possessed the aptitude to wield it. It is incredibly strong, being able to practically pierce whatever he wishes, like a wasp, pun very much intended there, and call it back with a simple hand gesture. But it's very, strange to say the least, the fact that he coincidentally found that relic and was able to properly wield it. In fact, the player text also said at the end, "What is coincidence indeed?" And I don't know about you, but I find this kind of suspicious in my opinion. Nevertheless though, that relic is one of the few major reasons as to why he is a color fixer today, and was also the reason why he was aptly named the Yellow Harpoon by Ezra. Quote, "Okay, hear me out baby B. You're good with harpoons, right? You use a super snazzy special harpoon, right? And you're shooting for the yellow color, right? Bam! There you have it. The Yellow Harpoon." Now, along with that relic, there's also the unsurprising fact that he is quite a good fighter, with some augmentations that allow him to utilize this sports fighting style called the Epic Flash Burst Blade Art, a sword fighting style that is known to use instantaneous bursts of leaping movement that verge on teleportation. And from what we can see in Canon 9, yeah, he's going so fast that he's essentially teleporting there. He's also skilled enough to have Shin and can rend space like the Dehui Star and her apprentice, so that's cool I suppose. Overall, Vespa is a very interesting character, but he definitely is not the best color fixer on the list, in my opinion. That much is very obvious if you want to compare, but we'll just have to wait and see how he grows as both a now recently appointed color fixer and as a person who is still somewhat agitated by his past. Our lovely guide. Vergilius, aka the Red Gaze, is quite a special color. It might seem weird to talk about him now of all times as our second color, considering how important he is, but whatever. So, Vergilius is an interesting one to talk on. After all, outside of our sinners and Dante, he is one of the few people that we see and talk to quite regularly across a good majority of the story, which makes sense because, well, he is our guide. But how did it come to this in the first place? Why is it that he, of all people, is our guide? Well, all of this is explained in yet another novel called Leviathan, which centers around Vergilius just before he was hired by Limbus Company to be the guide. And from this novel, we learn quite a bit about him and his past. In short, he had his own office, an orphanage, and he was living a relatively good enough life as the Red Gaze, until one Christmas Eve where the orphanage is destroyed by Iori, aka the Purple Tear, for some reason, and Tamari, both of which were released after the events of Library of Runa. And soon enough, a battle ensues between them, and Iori defeats Vergilius with relative ease. And eventually, we learn that, through the actions of Iori, most of the children from that orphanage, bar 2, either died or were secretly kidnapped by the Pointless of the Ring to be used in their Meritech experiments, of which Vergilius was able to deal with at the cost of his entire office and the two people who survived the destruction of the orphanage. Garnet, who essentially became a fucking red rock, read Leviathan if you want to know how that is the case, and Lapis, who was experimented on by the Ring as well, well and became an identity of sorts called Charon. Yay, Charon mentioned, let's go. Which is saddening to Vergilius, but hey, he got a very cool ego from all that happening and is also now willing to keep moving forward even with all this blood on his hands, wherever it might come from. But all of this eventually leads to him being hired by Faust with the promise of saving both Lapis and Garnet from their current states, which eventually leads to the current events of the game. Now, Leviathan is pretty good, and I recommend people to read it if they want to know a tad bit more about Vergilius as a character, but I do wish we had some focus on Vergilius' past before he was a color fixer. We got a tiny bit of that when Vergilius first gained his ego, which we now know is called Lavacrum Sanguinis, about a certain friend who Vergilius promised to present to the world the longed for paradise, and also the fact that he was the reason why the children from the orphanage were, well, orphans, and the amount of regret and grief he feels from all of his bloody actions. But it's not enough to really know who he was and what he did at the time, so yeah. But then again, I assume that that was the intention since the novel is meant to bridge the gap between Labra Runa and Limbus Company only, and not expand on Vergilius' character in a major way. That would and will be covered in Limbus Company, and we can see that now in Canto 7, where his old friend was revealed to be a first kindred, and this friend of his has given him their eyes before eventually passing away. And it also became the reason as to why he's named the Red Gaze. His new eyes come from a blood fiend whose eyes are naturally red, which also gives him his signature look, which is quite cool if you ask me. And still, after 9 cantos, this is still the only reveal we have about Vergilius' past, besides the fact that they most likely have taught him how to manipulate blood via the blinding blood skill. Maybe in the fabled and potential Canto 13 or the Purgatorio arc, we'll get certain answers to certain questions, such as what the Gladius is, what he did before he was a color fixer, what led to him being the cold, jaded, and distant, yet also somewhat caring person that he is now, etc. But for now, though, we can only assume things about him until the time comes. If I were to explain who our next color fixer is in a single word, Iori, aka the Purple Tear, would be enigmatic, I think, if that's the right word for her. Maybe even, I don't know, a bitch. Like, why go after an orphanage, man? Come on. Either way, out of all the color fixers, we know very little about the Purple Tear, other than 2 specific things. Firstly, she can travel through dimensions, and secondly, she wants to find her long-lost son that she has lost over 40 years ago. Though, by the time Limbus is happening, it's most likely that it has already been almost 50 years now since he has gone missing at this point. Though still, it's also likely that he is dead in this world, so Iori is doing everything she can to get her son back, even by traveling through different worlds to do that. Now, as I said before, she can travel through different dimensions, but it is a tiny bit more complicated than that, and we know this thanks to her key page, and from that she can, quote, travel through time and space and see a myriad of possibilities, too many for you to possibly fathom. It's probably a little bit different from time travel as you commonly imagine it. Though still, because of the risk that time travel carries, with all the causality bullshit and the butterfly effect, it's fair to say that I travel to a completely different space. And while she has traveled through those different worlds, she has helped a couple people that she deemed to be worth helping in order to achieve her goals that will help her reach her son faster. Now, yes, despite her being capable of traveling through different worlds, it's best to know that, according to Iori, this power isn't omnipotent, and it also isn't almighty by any means. So if you're wondering, no, she can't just travel to a world where her son is still alive and with her and be done with it. She has to do certain things in order to get to that point. Though attacking an orphanage is certainly a decision, but who knows, maybe removing an orphanage will lead to a version of her son not being an orphan or something like that. I don't know. I would also like to mention that she also has a potential connection towards sending Panther, Lion, and Wolf to kill Dante, or most likely just to get answers from Dante before succumbing to the regular gotcha amnesia main character curse, being called the Serpent by Vergilius, which makes sense considering her snake-like moveset and design, which I actually kind of like. Though still, I imagine that we won't get to know her too much since it's been 9 cantos so far and we still haven't met our original 3 pursuers or the Purple Tear, which is quite sad since 1, I do kind of want to know why and how she actually has that power, and 2, I miss Wolf. But, oh well, I guess we'll have to wait, I suppose. Also, is it tear or tear? I never can figure it out, since she can tear portals into different dimensions, but it can also be tears since her icon shows a tear, and also is meant to represent her potential sadness over losing her son. I don't know. Maybe it's both. Maybe. Though I'm more used to calling her Purple Tear, not Tear, so I'll probably still call her Purple Tear. Argalia, aka the Blue Reverberation, is the main antagonist of Library of Ruina, and as Roland would like to put it, he is a certified lunatic, a person who lost his mind after losing his dear sister, Angelica, after the penis attacked. Now we don't know much about his past before he became a color fixer, but we do know that he and his sister were a part of some experiments before escaping, and eventually becoming fixers until the pianist appeared and killed his sister, of course. In his key page, he describes how he felt about losing Angelica, describing it as, "For the first time, emotions I couldn't understand welled up inside me. It's hard to define what they were, even now. It felt as if deep, tenebrous stains were seeping out of my heart. Alas, I didn't shed tears before that piano where your body rested, for I soon realized that you were no longer there." He deeply cared for his sister. After all, she was the gentle breeze that brushed past my face, and the clouds that fly in the sky, which give me head of your presence from overhead or underfoot. And that loss has deeply scarred him to the point that he has lost his mind. However, this has eventually led him to be capable of hearing the voice, aka Carmen, who wanted him to free the world from loneliness, to create a new world, one where people can live bountiful lives even if they have nothing, free from obsession or greed. And to do that, he created the Reverberation Ensemble as its conductor to cultivate the library to the point that he can use it for his own goals, along with some support from the Purple Tear because duh, and some other people as well. However, this comes at the cost of his color fixer titles, since he and his Reverberation Ensemble is considered to be a syndicate that causes a lot of trouble to the city by the Hana Association, which would be fun on its own for him, but two, even after all of that, they were quite unsuccessful with their plans, since even after eventually fully distorting, he has been truly killed by Roland after 3 days of battle. Now, I'll be honest and say, I don't necessarily understand why some people would like to call him weak. Like, sure, amongst other color fixers, he is on the more weaker side in terms of strength alone, probably around Vespa's level, maybe somewhat weaker if I were to be less generous to him, considering the lack of shin and the like. But he's still a color fixer. He can handle a lot of the threats on his own with ease, you know. Being capable of casually deflecting bullets is no small feat after all. Not to also mention the fact that he is also quite fast and also has this weird vibration power, which, according to the Library of Ruina art book, allows him to maximize his damage by matching his opponent's vibration, which I think has something to do with how fast he is or something like that. I don't really get it. Though, in hindsight, now that I mentioned this, he is definitely not the weakest color fixer by far, I imagine. Especially considering the experiments that he has felt with his sister, so I wouldn't be surprised if that is factored in as well to his strength and power. But with that being said though, he is not really my favorite color fixer still. Probably even my least favorite out of all the important color fixers, if I'm going to be honest. Not to say that I don't like him, but like, if you look back on the previous color fixers and the next ones that I'm going to cover and then compare them all to him, yeah, he doesn't have much going on for him. But then again, it's been a while since I last played Library, so maybe I would change my mind about him if I were to replay the game again at some point, but that's for future me to decide. The Black Silence. My god, why are there 5 fucking versions of them? The fact that Vianney's-san now exists is majorly the reason as to why I wanted to make this video in the first place, and since he is coming out now of all times with the 9-coin Furioso, I knew I was going to talk a bunch about the Black Silence. So, to start off, despite me saying that there are 5 versions of the Black Silence, there technically is/was only one Black Silence, aka Angelica, and she was a sweetheart of a person, being very casual and easygoing to the people that she was close with, aka just Roland. However, due to the dark past of being a part of some experiments with her brother, she has also gained the that's that and this is this mindset, a mindset that is filled with apathy, to accept the pain of the past and move on from it, and carry it with you. Eventually, when she became the Black Silence, she joined Charles's office and starts to bond with Roland, to the point that the both of them get engaged after dealing with the Blood Red Knight case. However, whilst Roland was dealing with his last job as a fixer before retiring completely, she and her unborn child dies to the pianist, which then leads me to the reason why there are 4 other versions of the Black Silence in the first place. After Angelica's death, Roland takes on the mantle of the Black Silence and goes on a killing spree for revenge, to figure out who exactly caused all of this to happen, before he was eventually exposed for his mass killing spree and was demoted all the way down to grade 9 by the Hana Association, which led him to go down a monotonous and sorrowful path of nihility and grief, until the Purple Tear appears and is willing to help him on fulfilling his vengeance. Which, can I just say, on how much Iori appears in the pasts of a couple color fixers as a mentor of some sorts, like, what the fuck does that have anything to do with saving your child? But anywho, Roland eventually appears inside the library with the help of Iori, and after the entirety of the game's plot, decides to fight and kill Angela for being the reason as to why the distortion phenomenon exists and why Angelica died in the first place, and have her feel the same sorrow as mine, or even worse actually. But eventually he decides to forgive her and become friends with her in the outskirts. Or he enacts his revenge and kills her and also dies at the hands of many people, including some of his comrades from Charles's office. But that's the non-canon bad end, we don't have to talk much about that. Now this would be where the legacy of the Black Silence would technically end, but apparently Hermes, a god of the city, decided that his story was so fucking good to the point that he decided to get a proxy of the index to replicate Roland's story from beginning to end. They commanded him to change his name, dye his hair, start a family and then lose his family, and they gave him a weapon that could change forms depending on the prescript that is given to him, similar to how the Black Silence could use the weaponry by summoning them from a pocket dimension in their gloves. This vial, called Katakeas, can summon anything, from something as simple as a poon to something complex as a sight, which the proxy, now named Rian, loves to use a bunch, as he gets the inspiration from Argalia of all people to lacerate through space itself. In fact, the prescript has given him nothing but the scythe for quite a bit actually, so it's very much intentional for Rian to use the scythe like Argalia, and all of this was before Roland was the Black Silence, by the way, which shows that the gods of the city are omnipotent. They know a lot. Now, eventually, all of this leads to the end of Canto 9, where he dies like Baden Roland, where instead of dying to his comrades, he instead decides to kill himself with a poon, as an act to end his own misery from the prescript. And a couple weeks later, we get an ID based off of Rian, so that's cool, I guess. I would also like to mention one other identity that exists along with Rian-san, who comes in the form of the Black Silence version of Garnet, where he takes the place of Roland, and Charon, or specifically Lapis, takes the form of Angelica. And here, Garnet becomes the new Black Silence and goes down the same nihilistic and blood-filled path of vengeance, similar to Roland. I just felt like mentioning him, to be honest. He doesn't have much worth talking about beyond what was already said about Roland himself, so yeah. Overall, yeah, I can see why Hermes likes the Black Silence a lot, or if you want to be specific, Roland, which I can see why. He's a very cool character, but the most important question to ask right now is, out of the 4 Black Silences, which is your most favorite? And me personally, I like Angelica as the Black Silence the most. Aesthetically, she looks much cooler than Roland in my opinion, and I'm very interested in her past more than Roland's, even if we clearly know what Roland's past is, but still though, all the Black Silences are cool. Now, before we move on and talk about her, I want to give some honorable mentions to a couple color fixers that were either mentioned once or shown once and never again. Starting with the Indigo Elder, an old man with a massive crossbow that he uses to hunt a bunch of whales in Eucor, along with the 5 calamities, or now 3, since the Pallid Whale and the all-impaling Marlin Whale, which gave the Elder his color title in the first place, are dead, killed by the Indigo Elder. Although, technically speaking, we are the ones that killed the Pallid Whale, so we should get the credit. But no, apparently he does. But oh well. He still looks incredibly sick. He looks like a regular old fisherman, but has that aura of a color fixer, you know? Though still, I think we won't see him again, unless we go back to Eucor, which is incredibly unlikely at this point. There is also the apparent Red Sack, who, according to Don, was a Deviat fixer that is known to give gifts to children like Santa Claus. Though I would take this apparent character with a sprinkle of salt, since it was never really confirmed confirmed or denied that he was either a color fixer, which considering the name and convention of color fixers, it's possible, but also it was never really confirmed or denied that he was also a fixer in general. Though then again, this comes from the Don Quixote, the fixer fanatic who specializes in all things that is fixer related, so who knows, maybe he did exist at one time before Vergilius came in to take over the red title, I guess. I would also like to mention the Jade Chillin, who was mentioned by Roland on a tweet about who's the strongest in the city currently, and it's still not confirmed on who they are, but it's still somewhat likely that it could be Jiachu, but considering that he is a Pinky member, I'm not entirely sure, but again, I don't know. Oh, and also the Vermilion Cross, who existed, I suppose. According to Don Juan's page, he was hired by the Hana Association to kill the Blue Reverberation and the Ensemble while they were busy with the library, but then he dies and becomes a slave to Elena, and that's it. There's also the Grass Maiden, who also once existed apparently, according to Don, back in Kanto 1, but I don't really know if she's a color fixer because of the fact that last I checked, grass is not a color that I know of. Unless we're going to go extremely technical here in color schemes, but whatever. The same argument also goes for the Jade Chillin, by the way. I don't know, maybe these were just very famous fixer titles that these two people held, but weren't necessarily colors, you know? Though, maybe I'm just coping here, so whatever. I would also like to add Barry and certain Sinclair to that list as well, though they aren't necessarily confirmed to be color fixers. One is aptly named the Green Damnation / Deliverance, which follows the usual naming scheme of color fixers, and Barry is wearing a bunch of blue, which gives me the idea that she was originally a blue color during the time, and she was a fixer, so yeah. Again, I only felt like mentioning them just cause it's not really confirmed and will likely never be confirmed that they were color fixers, other than Barry, I suppose, but oh well. So now that we're done with that, let's move on and talk about her. Now with that, we are finally finishing this video off with definitively the strongest color fixer to ever face the city, and potentially the most influential one by far, Callie, aka the Red Mist. She is considered to be a legend, renowned for her immense strength and her sense of justice. However, before she became the famed Red Mist, she was an orphan of the backstreets, enduring gang wars and violence from syndicates and the like. And this experience with her horrible life led her to want to become a fixer to protect those that once protected her as a child and protect those that are enduring what she once endured as well. And over time, that resolve and sense of justice did not break her, even after the few betrayals that she has witnessed herself. And eventually, her actions were recognized by the Hana Association and was dubbed the Red Mist, named after the mist of blood that she left after battle. Eventually, Carmen hired Callie after some convincing for the Seed of Light project and became a dedicated member of said project in order to protect them from any sort of threat. Eventually, she was given a prototype of an ego weapon called Mimicry, of which we get to hear her experience with it in her page in Labraruna. Quote, "When I first had this sword in my grip, I didn't feel anything in particular. All I could tell is that it's just a big heavy greatsword. Nothing out of the ordinary other than its appearance. But when I held the sword for a few days later to protect a coworker of mine, I heard a voice. It was the voice of someone desperately yearning for something. That voice, as some of us might know by now thanks to Hohenheim Gregor's story and Red Eyes Fuyoshi's story, was her ego. Mimicry attempted to talk to her. At first it only made an awkward sound mimicking somebody, noises of teeth grinding, bones crackling and mingling with flesh. Eventually, over time, these noises became coherent language and was always asking about wanting a shell, similarly to what the source of the ego, nothing there, wants. At first, all that Callie could do was ignore the voice, but eventually the ego asked a peculiar question. Don't you desire a human shell as well? And after that, she eventually formed a suit of armor, aka ego, after thinking about the question and the answer to that question, and she became the first person to have manifested their own ego. Ultimately, however, the Seed of Light project has eventually failed, thanks to the head sending in an arbiter named Garion to deal with everyone there. Now, Callie has dealt a mortal wound upon her, but eventually she has succumbed to her wounds as well and died. Eventually, her remains were then used by Iron to make a Sephira of Lobotomy Corporation called Gebra, a reincarnation of Kali with her memories. And the rest is history. I could talk a lot more about her and what happens in LabCorp and Library Runa, but I feel like that would make the video far more longer than it should. So, yeah. Now, to everyone else, bar us and the Seed of Light crew, the Red Mist has just suddenly vanished and is remembered fondly by many people, which comes to show how big of an influence the Red Mist was to the city. But me personally, I feel like we are only told that as much and not really shown it, you know? A good majority of the time when the topic of the Red Mist comes around, we're only really shown the reactions of whenever she's mentioned, such as Roland figuring out that Gebra was the Red Mist and him being shocked by it, and also Don Quixote in general, but that's just because she's a Fixer fanatic, so her reaction to potentially getting an identity of the legendary Fixer, the Arch Magnificence, and the one and only Red Mist makes sense. But back on the topic, yes, we are only told of how legendary she was, but it doesn't really seem like the people of the city really care that she's gone in the first place, from what I've seen at least. Though then again, it has been a while since the Red Mist disappeared, and over time, people do tend to move on from that kind of thing, especially after many years, so yeah, I guess that makes sense. But as for the Red Mist herself, she's great. I love her character a lot, and she looks badass, she is badass. I don't think I need to say the things that has already been said countless times in terms of praise by everyone else, so yeah. And there you go. That is all of them. I just wanted to gush about a couple of color fixers and that's it. Now, as I said before, the release of Riani-san kind of made me think that now is a great time to make this video since, well, duh. But still, even without the existence of Riani-san or Vespa as the color fixer, I feel like I would have still made this video either way, with the only major difference being the lack of a certain wasp-looking color fixer. But still though, I have to say, that was fun. Next time though, I feel like my next video should be a lot more shorter since I feel like putting up 2 long videos back to back is not a good idea for both myself and you, even if I do enjoy making longer videos, so bye.